You won't believe what my own daughter said to me after I lost everything. After years of giving my all, raising her alone, sacrificing every part of myself, I found myself standing on her doorstep with nowhere else left to turn. And then she said the words that shattered me. You ruined my aesthetic. In that moment, everything shifted. If she thought I'd disappear quietly, she had no idea who I really am. I never thought I'd be there. Suitcase in one hand, ashes clinging to my clothes, the smoke still stubborn on my coat from the fire that had destroyed my home just the night before. Every photo, every memory, every piece of my life was reduced to cold, silent ashes. And yet, there I was, facing the daughter I'd given everything to, desperate for something I hadn't even dared to ask for in years. Her house was perfect, like something out of a magazine. A stone facade, a tall black door, perfectly arranged potted plants. The porch light cast a golden glow around her as she opened the door, dressed flawlessly, calm and untouched by the chaos I brought with me. She didn't ask why I was there, didn't glance at the suitcase or the soot on my coat. She didn't flinch. She just looked at me as if I didn't belong, like an unwanted, mismatched cushion on her pristine couch. Then she said it, cold and cutting. You can't stay here, Mom. You ruined the aesthetic. I barely remember what I said after that. Maybe I nodded. Maybe I mumbled. But the sound of that door closing, soft, final, echoed in my mind all night, like the cruel punctuation at the end of a sentence I never wanted to hear. I ended up at the Oakview Inn, a rundown place with wet carpet and mildew, but at least it had a bed, a lamp, and a cracked mirror that barely reflected me. Maybe that was a mercy. I sat there, clutching the phone, wanting to call someone, anyone, but I had no one. I raised Emily alone. Her father left when she was 10, leaving me with a mortgage, a daughter, and an old Buick that refused to start when it rained. I worked all day at a diner and sewed at night just to make rent. I never remarried, not because I didn't want to, but because I never trusted anyone enough to bring into my daughter's life, and none of them ever stayed. This is just the beginning of what I faced. Emily was always the shining star, straight A's, a college scholarship, becoming a nutritionist. She married a plastic surgeon and moved to Charleston, climbing the ladder of success with a new car, a new house, and new friends. I was proud, but with every step she took away from me, I felt myself fading farther into the background. Still, I never imagined she'd shut the door on me when I had nowhere else to turn. That night in the motel, I cried silently, not wanting anyone in the next room to hear. I'm not someone who cries easily. Not when I lost my job. Not when I buried my sister with no family around. But that night, the tears came until my throat ached. Because for the first time, I faced a harsh truth. I had become a burden, an eyesore, a blot on the carefully painted picture of her perfect life. The next morning, I took a long, aimless walk. My feet led me to Oakwood Terrace, the old neighborhood where I raised Emily in a small, worn two-bedroom house with a chain-link fence and a backyard full of wild dandelions. It had been years since I'd been back. That's when I saw Velma. She was sitting on her porch, shelling peas like she did when we were younger. She squinted at me, then laughed loud enough to scare the birds away. "Maggie Walker," she said, hopping off her rocker like no time had passed. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I didn't tell her everything, just enough. I was staying at the Oakview Inn. I needed some fresh air, and I was trying to figure things out. But Velma wasn't fooled. "You're not figuring anything out, sugar," she said. "You're just trying not to fall apart." We talked for hours about old memories, our daughters, and the years that slipped away like wild horses. Then, like always, Velma cut through the silence with a sharp truth. "You still got fight in you, Maggie. You just forgot how to throw a punch." That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, thinking about everything I'd sacrificed for Emily, how I'd put her first every single day, only to be thrown out like I was nothing. At dawn, I reached for my little black notebook, the one I kept tucked in my purse, filled with every penny I ever saved, every secret stock, every dime from sewing. I added it all up. It wasn't enough for revenge, but enough for something new. 2 weeks later, I found the house. Big white columns, a wraparound porch, and sweeping views of the marsh. A true Southern Belle's dream. Emily had once circled a picture of a house like this in a magazine when she was young and said, "One day I'm going to live there." I bought it, in cash, painted fresh white with a manicured lawn and a bright red "For Sale" sign out front. I took a picture. I sent her the picture. No words, just the house. Less than 5 minutes later, her call came through. "Mom?" Her voice was tight, almost trembling. "Why did you send me that?" "Because I bought it," I said. Silence on the other end. "It's yours, or it could be, but I'm thinking of selling it." Her voice cracked. "Why? Why would you do that?" I stayed calm, steadier than I'd felt in years. "Because, sweetheart, it fits your aesthetic." I hung up before she could reply, and for the first time in a long time, a slow smile crept across my face. But what I didn't know then, what I couldn't see, was that this wasn't just about a house. This was the start of something much bigger. Something that would break us apart and maybe, just maybe, bring us back together. But first, secrets buried deep were about to surface. I was about to find out Emily wasn't the only one hiding things all these years. She didn't call back that night. I half expected her to, maybe to yell, to cry, or to tell me I was overreacting. But instead, silence settled like a thick, cold fog, heavy with all the things left unsaid. I stayed one more night at the Oak View Inn. The mattress felt harder, the vending machine outside louder than I remembered. I stared at the ceiling, letting the quiet stretch around me. This time, I wasn't rushing. For once, I was in control. The next morning, I returned to the house I bought. It sat proudly on a hill, wide and welcoming, with a porch that begged for Sunday coffee and whispered gossip. I wandered through every room. The hardwood floors creaked beneath me, like they remembered stories long forgotten. The air smelled of lemon polish and something older, something waiting to be rewritten. In the dining room, a crystal chandelier caught the sunlight and shattered it into rainbows dancing on the walls. I imagined Emily there, sitting at the head of the table, glass of wine in hand, trying to impress her friends. Would she ever see this house as more than just a photo on her phone? Then she appeared. I was in the sunroom, sipping cold coffee from a paper cup, when I heard tires crunching on the gravel. I didn't move. After a minute, the front door opened. She used the key I'd sent 2 days ago, wrapped in a velvet pouch. "Mama." Her voice was soft, uncertain. I stayed quiet. She found me, her heels clicking on the wooden floor like gunshots. She looked exhausted, eyes puffy, hair a little wild, not the polished woman I knew. "You really bought this?" she asked, eyes flicking around like it might disappear if she blinked. I nodded. "Why?" I leaned back in the wicker chair. "Because you said I ruined your aesthetic. I figured I'd find one that suited you better." For a moment, her face crumpled. just a flicker, before the wall went back up. She squared her shoulders. This isn't funny, Mom. I'm not laughing. You sent me a picture of a house you knew I'd love, and then put a for sale sign on it. I smiled faintly. I thought you liked signs. She blinked, voice low. Is this revenge? No, I said quietly. It's a mirror. We sat in silence, the weight of everything hanging between us. Finally, she whispered, You have no idea how things are now. My world is all planned out. Every detail has a spot, a look, a rule. And I don't fit into that picture. She swallowed hard. You're unpredictable. You say things without thinking how they sound. You don't try to blend in. I stared at her. I didn't raise you to blend in. I raised you to stand tall. She looked away. Is that why you've been rewriting things? I asked, my voice low. Suddenly, she snapped her head back. What do you mean? She asked. You told people your father left and never looked back. But that's not the truth, is it? Her mouth opened slightly, but no words came. I stood and walked to a drawer where I had hidden something earlier, an old, worn envelope from my past. I handed it to her. She hesitated, fingers trembling as she unfolded the letter inside. It was from her father, written 8 years after he left. He begged for forgiveness, said he'd found God, found purpose, found strength to be better. He said he tried to come back, visited twice, but was turned away. Her lips moved silently as she read, then her knees gave out, and she sank onto the couch. I told him to leave, she whispered, barely audible. He called. I answered. He wanted to see us. I told him we didn't need him. I was 16. I thought I was protecting you. I sat beside her, heart pounding. Anger bubbled up inside me. You worked so hard. He left you with nothing. I wanted to punish him, so you erased him. Tears filled her eyes. I never told you. I didn't think you'd forgive me. I reached for her hand. She flinched, but let me hold it. There's more than one way to destroy a home, Emily, I said softly. Sometimes it's not fire. Sometimes it's silence. We sat in heavy silence, years pressing down on us. I don't deserve this house, she finally said. That's not for me to decide, I replied, her eyes locked onto mine. What if I wanted to earn it? I said nothing, staring out at the wild garden pushing through cracks. Then we'd have to start again, I said. It won't be easy. Her voice broke. I don't want easy. I want you back. Part of me softened, but the other part, the part that remembered the cold porch light, her perfect cardigan, stood firm. Then don't say it, I whispered. Show it. She nodded, and just like that, the first crack appeared in the wall between us. But as I soon learned, the house wasn't the only thing hiding secrets. There was one more envelope hidden deep in that box. Yellowed, fragile, sealed with brittle tape, buried at the very bottom. I hadn't even noticed it until the day after Emily left, tears still fresh, promising she'd try. It's strange how a single piece of paper can sit quietly for decades, untouched, unchanged, waiting for the exact moment it's meant to shatter you completely. I sat in the small breakfast nook where the morning sun spilled just right. Outside, the wind gently pulled at the old for sale sign I never bothered to take down. Maybe part of me wanted it to stay, like a silent dare. When I finally opened the envelope, my heart nearly stopped. The handwriting was his, Daniel's. I hadn't seen those sharp, slanted, hurried letters in over 30 years, but I'd recognize them anywhere. Each scratch of ink echoed his restless voice, always like he was halfway out the door, even when still. The letter was dated just 4 years ago, recent not ancient history or some forgotten relic. Maggie, if this finds you, it means I finally found the courage to try again. I don't have the right to ask for anything, but I've spent the last 10 years wrestling with the man I used to be. I was a coward. Fear and failure consumed me. Leaving you was the worst mistake of my life. I tried to come back twice. Emily wouldn't let me through the door. She said you were better off, that you'd moved on, that I'd only bring pain. I stopped reading. My hands shook, my vision blurred. I could still see Emily, 16, sharp-tongued, brittle with pride. She'd always been fiercely protective, loyal, angry at the world for forcing her to grow up too soon. But this secret she'd kept from me, cut deeper than I could explain. I pressed the letter to my chest, rocking slightly in the chair. The pain inside wasn't quite betrayal, more like grief reborn. When I finished, I learned Daniel had remarried briefly, no children, but his wife had died of cancer. After that, he moved to Tennessee, living simply, working in a used bookstore, writing letters he never sent. The last line destroyed me. If I don't get to see you again in this life, know I never stopped loving you, and I never stopped hoping for one more chance. I had to find him. I didn't know why exactly. Closure, maybe. Or the need to look him in the eye and decide if anything was left between us. Velma was the first to notice the change. "You've got that old fire back in your eyes," she said, leaning over the fence, cigarette dangling. "You going somewhere?" "Tennessee," I said, folding laundry on the porch. "Maybe for a few days, maybe longer." She raised an eyebrow. "That where the bones are buried?" I smiled faintly. "Number. But maybe it's where I left part of myself." 3 days later, I drove west. I hadn't taken a solo road trip in decades. The windows were down, the radio low, just enough to keep the silence at bay. I drove past towns with names I couldn't even begin to pronounce, past diners where the coffee was so strong it felt like it could wake the dead. When I finally reached the address from the letter, there it was. A small, one-story house with faded blue shutters. Dusk was settling in, and a "For Rent" sign hung crookedly out front. My stomach twisted. Still, I knocked. A thin woman in her 40s opened the door, confusion in her eyes when I asked for Daniel Walker. "He passed away last spring," she said softly. "I'm the landlord now." The ground seemed to vanish beneath me. He was gone. She nodded. "Pancreatic cancer. It was fast. Didn't even make it 3 months after diagnosis." I couldn't breathe. I didn't cry. I just stood there, numb. Then she said, "Are you Maggie?" I blinked. "Yes." Her smile was warm, kind. "He talked about you all the time. Said you were the one who got away. He left something for you." She led me inside. The house smelled like old books and lemon oil. Near the window, on a shelf, sat a small wooden box carved with tiny birds. Inside, photos of me and Emily from years ago, a pressed flower from our wedding, and another letter. This one was shorter, but every word hit me hard. "You were my lighthouse, even when I drifted. I hope you found happiness. I hope you knew deep down I always loved you. And if there's still a chance, wherever I am, I'll be waiting." The drive back was a blur. I don't remember much, only that the sun was rising as I pulled back into Charleston. I sat in the driveway for a long time. Emily's car was there already. She was on the porch steps, knees pulled tight to her chest. Makeup streaked down her face. When I stepped out, she stood, but said nothing. I walked up slowly, the letter from Daniel still tucked in my coat pocket. I didn't give it to her. Not yet. "I know," she said before I could speak. "I know about the letter. I know you know." I nodded. "Why, Emily?" "I thought I was protecting you. she whispered. I thought he didn't deserve you. I was wrong. I know that now. I searched her face, really looked, and for the first time in years, I saw the little girl who used to curl up beside me during power outages, the one who believed I could fix anything. I forgave him, I said softly. She choked out a sob. Can you forgive me? I didn't answer right away. Forgiveness, real forgiveness, isn't a sudden spark. It's a slow rain. It takes time. I needed her to feel it, to earn it, to carry it the way I carried her. The truth was out now, but the story was far from over. Redemption isn't handed out, it's built. And I had an idea where to start. It began with paint. Not fancy wallpaper or marble counters, just paint. Soft whites, gentle yellows, lavender in the bedrooms, warm, welcoming colors. Emily rolled the first coat on the living room wall herself, hair tied up in a messy knot. Her sleeves were rolled up, and by the end of the first day, her designer nails were chipped. She didn't even notice. She was trying. I could feel it in the way she moved through the house. Not like its new owner, but like someone learning what it truly meant to belong somewhere again. The mansion, once a cold symbol of perfection and pretense, began to breathe like a living thing. The heavy curtains came down. The shining Art Deco chandeliers were swapped for soft Edison bulbs. She even let Velma pick the kitchen tile. Lord help her. We worked side by side. Me, Velma, a few old friends from the neighborhood who hadn't seen Emily since she wore braces. They all came back, not for her name, but for what the house was becoming. Not just a home, but a refuge. We named it Rose Harbor, a place for older women cast aside by family, abandoned by partners, or simply forgotten by the world. Women like me, like Velma, like so many who had nowhere to go when life decided they were no longer needed. It was Emily's idea. I want to fix what I broke, she told me one night as we painted the porch swing a deep teal. Not just between us. I want to be someone who makes space for women like you, women like us. I didn't say much. I just kept painting. But something inside me softened. A knot in my chest slowly loosening. 3 months later, the house opened its doors. We held a simple gathering on the front lawn. Plastic chairs, lemonade, peach cobbler, and a band made up of high school kids from down the street. I wore the same navy dress I'd worn to Emily's graduation. It still fit. Emily stood on the porch and spoke to the crowd. My mother built me a life when she had nothing, she said, her voice shaking. I turned my back on her when all she asked for was a place to sleep. I was cruel. I was selfish. But she didn't repay me with anger. She gave me a gift I didn't deserve. Today, I'm asking for something better than forgiveness. I'm asking for a second chance. The crowd was silent. Then a few clapped. Then more. Then everyone. I cried quietly in my chair, dabbing my eyes with a napkin that smelled faintly of barbecue sauce. Later that evening, after everyone had gone, I sat on the porch steps, watching the stars blink into the night sky. Emily brought me a glass of iced tea, sat beside me, and leaned her head on my shoulder, just like she used to when she was little. You were right, she whispered, her voice trembling with a mix of relief and sorrow. A house doesn't make a home. I reached slowly into my pocket, my fingers closing around something familiar. The deed, worn and folded, already signed over to her name months ago. I gave this to you before, I said softly, but I want you to truly understand what it means. Her eyes fixed on the paper, heavy with everything left unsaid. You get the house, I told her. But Rose Harbor, it stays. The women stay. The mission stays. She nodded. silent tears tracing down her cheeks, and I squeezed her hand tightly. I won't let you down again. We'll be fine. A week later, an envelope arrived with no return address. Inside was a photograph. Me and Daniel, caught in a moment from a summer picnic when Emily was just 3. We smiled at each other as if the whole world had faded away. On the back, in handwriting, I recognized instantly 6 words. You made it home. Who sent it? I'll never know. Maybe a co-worker from Daniel's bookstore. Maybe something bigger. Fate, or even God. Maybe just the wind carrying messages to where they belong. But since then, the house has never been quiet. Laughter echoes through the halls. Stories are shared on the porch in rocking chairs. Women dance in the kitchen at midnight. There are scars here, yes, but also healing. Grace. Emily still gets frustrated sometimes, sharp as ever, but she laughs more now, holds me tighter when she hugs me. And when she introduces me to the new neighbors, she says, "This is my mother, Margaret." She's the reason all of this exists. I smile, because I am. I was never perfect, but I was hers. And that was enough to build something real, something beautiful, something that saved us both. It had been exactly 6 days since Emily's confession on the porch. 6 days since she said the words I'd waited 30 years to hear. I want you back. But what she didn't know, what no one knew, was that I wasn't ready yet. Healing isn't just putting broken pieces back together. Sometimes, it means staring at the shattered mess long enough to understand why it broke in the first place. For me, that meant going back to the beginning. I hadn't been to Oakwood Terrace in nearly 10 years, but on that 7th morning, I found myself driving its cracked streets, past overgrown lots and rusted mailboxes. That neighborhood raised me as much as I raised Emily, and beneath the peeling paint and forgotten porches lay answers I didn't even know I needed. The house where I raised Emily still stood, barely. The paint was long gone, the fence sagging as if tired of holding on. But the tree in the front yard, the one Emily climbed every summer, was taller, stronger, bursting with white blossoms like tiny sparks of hope. I stepped out of the car and stood still. And that's when I saw her. Mrs. Loretta Mason. She lived just across the street, back when I was still packing lunchboxes and patching jeans. Now in her 80s, she sat on her porch like time hadn't touched her, still elegant, with a wide-brimmed hat and a warm mug of tea. "Maggie Walker," she called out, her voice soft but clear. "Is that you?" I laughed through the lump in my throat and crossed the street to her. We talked for hours about the old days, how the neighborhood had changed, and how we'd both changed. Then, suddenly, she said something that stopped me cold. "I always wondered what really happened between you and Daniel." I stared at her, heart pounding. "What do you mean?" She took a slow sip of tea. "I saw him. A few years after he left, he came by the house, asking if I knew where you'd moved. Said he was trying to find his girls." My breath caught. "You never told me." She looked down, guilt weighing on her. I didn't want to stir up pain. But now, seeing you again, maybe that was wrong. Maybe you needed to know he tried. That was the second time someone told me Daniel came back. Suddenly, it all clicked. Emily hadn't just slammed the door on her father. She'd buried the truth, hidden it deep out of pain, fear, maybe even love. But that lie had kept me trapped in a false story of my own life for decades. I returned to the house, not the old one, but my house. The one with the porch swing and grand columns, the one still with the for sale sign leaning in the wind. Stepping inside, the air felt heavy, like the walls carried the weight of memories I'd tried to ignore. I knew what I had to do next. I went up to the attic, a secret place few knew about, not even Emily. Behind a narrow door at the back of the upstairs hallway, I found the unfinished space, dusty with beams overhead and the scent of cedar and thyme. And there it was, the box. I hadn't opened it since the week after the fire that destroyed my old rental and pushed me to Emily's porch in the first place. Somehow, it survived the blaze, tucked away in my car's trunk, along with a few other things I never unpacked. I had hidden it here when I moved in quietly. Inside were photos, letters, receipts, and a folded piece of torn notebook paper in Emily's handwriting. Mom, if you're reading this, I guess I couldn't say it to your face. You loved me so hard I didn't know how to love you back. Every success I had felt like a debt I owed you. Every mistake you made felt like a wound I couldn't stop picking at. I didn't understand what you gave up for me until it was too late. My knees gave out. I sank to the attic floor, the box beside me, and tears flowed freely. For the first time, I saw her. Not as the woman who slammed the door in my face, but as the girl I raised. The girl carrying just as much pain as I did. Hers had built walls. Mine had built distance. That night, I didn't call her. I did something else. I took down the for sale sign. The next morning, I went to a lawyer and signed the deed over to Emily, but not just as a house. It came with one condition. The home must become a nonprofit shelter for women who've been displaced, rejected, or left with nowhere to go. It wasn't a trap. It was hope. It was a lifeline. I sent the papers to Emily, along with a note that said, "Your look doesn't define your worth, but maybe now it can help rebuild someone else's." The very next day, there was a knock at the door. Emily stood there. No makeup, no masks, just tears in her eyes and a folder in her hand. She handed me the signed papers. "I want to help them," she said softly. "I want to start with you." And just like that, the door that had slammed shut so long ago swung wide open again, this time for so many more. There's a moment just before dawn when the sky turns a deep velvet blue and everything feels suspended. Not quite night, not quite morning. It's that stillness, like the world is holding its breath. That's when I stood on Rose Harbor's front porch, coffee in hand, watching the fog roll in from the marsh. The house was quiet, for now. Inside, two women slept in rooms we'd prepared just the day before. Sandra, kicked out of her son's home after breaking her hip and becoming too much, and Denise, a former teacher who lived in her car for nearly a year after her husband drained their retirement and disappeared. They weren't just statistics to me. They were me. They were the first. Emily took the papers and ran with them. She hired a nonprofit consultant, reached out to city leaders, met with social workers, even set up a small fund to cover their first expenses. Every decision, every plan came to me first. "Does this feel right, Mama?" she'd ask. I never thought I'd hear her say that again. Between meetings, she helped clean rooms, paint furniture, and even drove the old church van across town to pick up donations. Every day, she asked me real questions. Not polite small talk, but questions that cut deep. What did you dream about before you had me? Did you ever want to run away? Did I make you happy? That last one hit me like a punch. I looked her straight in the eye and said, "You were the best and hardest thing that ever happened to me." She didn't flinch. She just nodded. That's when I knew she was changing. Maybe I was too. But the past wasn't done with us. Not yet. 3 weeks after Rose Harbor officially opened, my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, Nashville area code. My stomach sank. A soft, shaky voice spoke. "Is this Margaret Walker?" "Yes." "I'm so sorry to call like this. I'm Daniel's nurse. I cared for him before he passed. He asked me to reach out if we ever found your number." I sat down slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. The word heart felt heavier than ever. The nurse spoke gently. "He talked about you every single day," she said. But there was more. Daniel left something behind for me, something private. 2 days later, a small package arrived at Rose Harbor, wrapped simply in brown paper. Inside was an old leather journal, worn and fragile, the spine nearly falling apart. On the very first page, in bold, familiar handwriting that only a mother who carried her child deep in her heart could recognize, his words waited. I didn't open it right away. I waited until nightfall, until the house was quiet, the tea was warm, and the lights were low. Emily sat across from me, cross-legged on the floor, waiting. Together, we read every word, his regrets, his memories, the moment he decided to leave, the times he tried to come back, the letters he never sent, and the time he stood in the shadows at Emily's high school graduation, watching from afar because he didn't know if he deserved to be there. He had seen us. He had never stopped seeing us. At the very end, he wrote, "If this journal finds its way to you, it means I finally got something right. Tell Emily I never stopped loving her. Tell her I forgave her. Tell her I understand." Emily pressed her forehead to the pages and wept, not like a broken child, not like a shattered woman, but like someone finally set free. We buried the journal beneath the magnolia tree out back, beside a bench we'd painted soft blue. We didn't mark the spot. We didn't need to. Time passed. More women came, each carrying stories heavier than any bag or suitcase could hold. And every time one of them said, "I didn't think anyone would take me in," something in my chest grew. Emily became their voice. I became their storyteller. Together we became something neither of us had ever truly known. Whole. One night, as we sat on the porch swing, her feet tucked under a blanket, my hand resting on hers, she asked, "Do you think he knows what we've built?" I looked out at the house glowing softly from within. Laughter drifted down from an open window. Soft jazz played in the parlor. "I think he does," I said, and I meant it. Because sometimes redemption isn't loud. It doesn't come with a parade or a thunderclap. Sometimes it's a woman walking through the front door, shaking hands and tired eyes, finding a bed with fresh sheets and a note on the pillow that reads, "You are home." We saved each other, my daughter and I, not by forgetting what happened, but by choosing to rise from it. And I've learned this much. The most beautiful things don't fit anyone's idea of perfect. They just felt like they belonged, like love, like truth, like finally coming home after the longest, hardest journey of your life. 3 months after Rose Harbor opened its doors, word spread like wildfire beyond Charleston. Local news called it a southern sanctuary for the forgotten. Donations started pouring in, furniture, books, fresh linens. One man showed up with 5 brand new mattresses, tears in his eyes, whispering, "My mama died alone." I wish she'd had this. But what made Rose Harbor truly sacred wasn't the porch swing, the new garden beds, or even the hand-sewn curtains Emily made with care. It was the women. Women who'd been told they were too loud, too needy, too much. Women abandoned by their children, their husbands, or even time itself. Each one carried stories packed tight, like suitcases ready to burst. One of them was Ruth, 82 years old, a former jazz singer. 2 strokes had left her fragile. No family except a nephew who hadn't called in years. She arrived at our gate in a wheelchair, clutching a single bag and a bottle of cheap perfume tucked in the side pocket. "I heard you take women like me," she said softly. "I don't have much, but I can still hum a tune." That night, we welcomed her in. Ruth became the heartbeat of Rose Harbor. She sang at breakfast, spun wild stories of smoky clubs and secret love affairs with saxophone players. The other women gathered around her like moths to a flame. Ruth reminded me of something I'd almost forgotten. Joy isn't just surviving, it's singing. Emily adored her. Every Thursday night, she sat brushing Ruth's hair, listening to the same stories over and over, never interrupting, never rushing. I watched them from the hallway, and sometimes, just sometimes, I saw the daughter Emily had always hoped to become. But not everything was easy. One night, Ruth collapsed in the hallway. Her breathing was shallow. Her eyes rolled back. Emily froze. I didn't. I knelt beside her, called for help, held her hand until the ambulance arrived. As they wheeled Ruth away, she looked at me with glassy eyes and whispered, "Don't let me go in silence." That night, I couldn't sleep. Neither could Emily. We sat in the kitchen, gripping mugs of steaming tea we didn't drink. "She's dying," Emily said, her voice hollow. "She's living," I corrected her. "Right now, and until her last breath, we treat her like she matters." Emily stared at me, eyes wide and wounded. "I was so scared," she admitted. "She looked like you." In that moment, I realized this was never just about Ruth, or the house, or even Daniel. It was about the fear Emily had carried for years. The fear that one day I'd vanish, leaving her with nothing but guilt and regret. That fear had made her cruel, but now it was making her brave. Ruth pulled through the night and the next. She came home 5 days later, carrying an oxygen tank and a playlist of Ella Fitzgerald songs we played every afternoon. She was weaker now, quieter, still Ruth though. On her last morning, she asked for one simple wish: to go out singing. We dressed her in a soft blue velvet robe, wrapped a blanket around her legs, and sat her gently on the porch swing. The sun was just peeking over the horizon when she opened her mouth and began to sing the first few lines of Misty. Her voice was soft, trembling, but it was still hers. By the time she finished, she was gone. Emily held her hand the whole time. We buried Ruth's ashes beneath the rose bush we'd planted in her honor, and each woman placed a flower on the soil. Emily read a poem she had written by hand. I cried openly, not just for Ruth, but for all of us who'd ever been told we were too much or never enough. That night, Emily crawled into my bed like she did when she was 5. No words, just tears, silence, and that deep, aching kind of love that has nowhere else to go. I held her until she fell asleep. The next morning, I found her in the sunroom, coffee in hand, staring out the window. "I want to write about this place," she said. "The stories, the women, everything." I smiled. "Then start with your own," I told her. She looked at me, uncertain. "Do you think anyone would want to hear it?" I leaned in and kissed her forehead. "Emily Walker, your story is the one that built this house." And I meant it. Because in the end, it wasn't vengeance that made me whole. It wasn't the house or the letter. It was Emily choosing to become a woman who didn't just apologize but changed. And through that change, she gave me something no one else ever had. Not just a second chance, but the life I should have had all along. A week after Ruth's funeral, I sat alone in the sunroom, sorting through the last of the donation boxes. There were crocheted blankets, a stack of soft robes, and a handwritten note from a church group in Savannah. Every stitch was made with love. I held one blanket close. It smelled like lavender and memories. It had been 4 months since I bought the house. 4 months since Emily told me I ruined her aesthetic. 4 months since everything in my life turned upside down. Somehow, through all the heartache, everything found its place, exactly where it needed to be. But peace is strange. It doesn't arrive with fireworks or fanfare. It comes in quiet moments when you least expect it. Like when Velma burst in, waving a newspaper. "Guess who's front page news again, sugar?" she said, slapping the Charleston Gazette onto the table. There we were, me, Emily, and a group of women from Rose Harbor, arms around each other on the porch, all grinning like fools. From rejection to redemption, this home was changing lives right here in Charleston. I stared at the photo for a long time, not because I liked looking at myself, I still didn't, but because I barely recognized the woman staring back. It wasn't the hair or the dress, it was the expression. She looked happy. Later that afternoon, a knock came at the door. It wasn't a delivery or a social worker. It was a boy, maybe 16, thin and nervous, clutching an envelope like it might bite him. "You, Margaret?" he asked. I nodded. He handed me the envelope and turned to run down the steps before I could even ask a question. Inside was a letter, not typed, but carefully written by hand in pen. "Mrs. Walker, you don't know me, but I knew your husband. Daniel worked with my mother at the bookstore. He talked about you a lot, said you were the strongest woman he ever met. He gave me this letter months before he passed, told me to deliver it when the time felt right. I didn't understand until I saw the news about Rose Harbor. Now I know. I hope this gives you peace." I sat down slowly, fingers trembling as I unfolded the paper. Daniel's handwriting was messier now, weaker, but it was his. "Maggie, if you're reading this, it means someone braver than me brought it to you. I wish I could have sat beside you, held your hand, and said these words out loud. But life rarely gives us the endings we want, only the ones we make. I know what I did. I know what I left behind. And I know I didn't deserve your forgiveness, but you loved me anyway. I see that now, in this house, in what you're building. You turned rejection into refuge, pain into purpose. You turned our unfinished story into something beautiful. I'm sorry I couldn't stay, but maybe in some strange way, you've brought us all home. Always yours, Dee." I pressed the letter to my chest and cried, not the kind of tears that break you, but the kind that set you free. That night, I called Emily outside. The moon was high, and the air smelled like gardenia. I handed her the letter. She read it silently, one hand covering her mouth. When she finished, she rested her head on my shoulder, just like she used to when she was little. "I wish I'd known him better," she whispered. "You still can," I told her. "Through this, through us." We sat there until the stars faded into morning light. That's when I knew we made it through. Not by erasing the pain, not by pretending it never happened, but by carrying it with grace, with grit, and with the unshakable belief that it's never too late to turn what's broken into something good. Rose Harbor still stands. Women still arrive, bags in hand, eyes wide with fear and hope. Every time, I greet them at the door with a smile and say, "Welcome home." Because I've learned the truth. Redemption doesn't knock. Sometimes you have to build the house yourself and leave the door wide open. It was a Wednesday when the last box was unpacked in the library. A room we never thought we'd fill, now overflowing with donated books, mismatched chairs, a grandfather clock ticking slightly offbeat, and sunlight pouring through the windows like pure grace. I ran my fingers along the spines of the books, romance novels, self-help guides, old cookbooks, and even a first edition of To Kill a Mockingbird with someone's name scribbled inside. Gloria. I smiled, thinking about how stories outlast us all. Emily stepped in behind me, carrying a steaming mug of chamomile tea and a folder tucked under her arm. Her face was flushed, not from makeup, but from something deeper, something meaningful. She handed me the folder. Inside were the final approval papers from the state. Rose Harbor, Inc., now officially a certified transitional living nonprofit. It's official now, she said, biting her lip to hold back tears. We're real. I took the papers and nodded slowly. You were always real, I whispered. You just had to remember. We spent the afternoon hanging photos in the hallway, portraits of the women who had stayed with us. Each frame had their name etched below, not just to honor them, but to remind us they were people with stories, proof that second chances can take root and grow. Velma showed up with a tray of lemon bars and plenty of sass. Y'all gonna cry every time you hang a picture? She teased. Probably, I said, grinning. Good, she nodded. Means you ain't turned into stone statues yet. Later that evening, I stood before the mirror in my bedroom, not fixing my hair or clothes, just really looking. For the first time in decades, I didn't see a woman rejected or forgotten. I saw someone whole. That's when I remembered something. A list I'd written long ago in the back of an old journal. A list titled, When I Have a Home Again. I searched through drawers until I found it. The paper was brittle, the ink faded, but the words were still there. A porch swing that creaks, a kitchen full of noise, laughter in the halls, music at night, peace in my bones, a daughter who sees me. I'd checked every box. I folded the list carefully and pressed it between two books on the shelf, then walked back into the hallway. That's when I saw Emily standing by the front door, hands tucked in the pockets of her sweater, watching the evening settle through the glass. When she turned, tears filled her eyes again, but this time, they were soft and grateful. She reached for my hand, holding it like it was something sacred. I found something today, she said quietly. She led me to the office and handed me an envelope, a new one, unopened, postmarked from Tennessee, no return address. Inside was a black and white photo. Daniel, me, Emily, no more than 3 years old, sitting on his shoulders, all of us laughing. On the back, scribbled in blocky handwriting, she turned out just fine. No signature, no explanation, just one last whisper from the universe. I smiled, not because it made sense, but because it didn't need to. Life doesn't tie up neatly. It twists, unravels, and bends in ways we never expect. But if we're lucky, if we're brave, it gives us chances to heal what we thought was gone forever. That night, we lit candles in the windows, not for those who had passed, but for the living. For every woman still on the road, still searching, still hoping. The porch was alive with voices, laughter, hands held tightly under warm blankets. Someone strummed a guitar softly, and the scent of cornbread and cinnamon floated through the air. I thought, this is the ending I never knew I wanted, but it's the one I earned. Not through perfection, but through resilience, truth, and a love that refused to give up, even when it was told it didn't belong. Emily looked at me and said, Mama, you built this. I shook my head. We built this. That's how you reclaim your story. Not by erasing the pain, but by filling the silence it leaves with voices that say, you still matter. You are not alone. You are home. The fall air was crisp the morning I found the letter, tucked beneath my porch pillow. I almost missed it. I'd come out early before sunrise, wrapped in my old flannel robe, ready to sip coffee and listen to the gentle creak of the porch swing, like I do every morning now. But when I leaned back, I felt something crinkle beneath me. A plain envelope. No stamp, no name, just one word on the front. Margaret. I stared at it for a long time. Emily was still asleep inside. The house was quiet except for the distant hum of birds waking and the occasional whistle of a car passing down the hill. The other women were asleep, too. A calm had settled over Rose Harbor. One of those rare golden mornings where everything feels suspended in grace. I opened the envelope with steady hands. Inside was a single typed letter from the law office of Franklin and Maynard. At first, my heart sank. I feared unfinished business from Daniel or some legal fight over the house or the nonprofit. But no, it wasn't bad news. It was a gift. The letter explained that Daniel's small estate, mostly a pension, a few royalties from a book project, and a modest life insurance policy, named me as the primary beneficiary. More than that, he had designated a portion to be transferred directly to Rose Harbor, under a special clause to continue the love that was never lost, only misplaced. I pressed my hand to my mouth and wept right there on the porch swing, the letter held tight to my chest. He hadn't forgotten. He had prepared quietly, in his own way. Daniel came back too. Later that day, I told Emily. She said nothing, just held me so tight I thought my ribs might break. Then she whispered, "He never stopped trying to fix it, did he?" "No," I replied, "and neither did you." With the inheritance, we grew Rose Harbor, added 2 more bedrooms, a new communal kitchen, and a small writing room overlooking the marsh. It was Emily's idea. We called it Daniel's room, not out of guilt, but out of hope. News spread fast. Within weeks, interviews were lined up. More funding poured in. Even a woman from the New York Times reached out. Emily managed it all with calm strength. I watched her, phone in one hand, clipboard in the other, glasses resting on her nose. My daughter was no longer trapped by pride or perfection. She now led with purpose. One evening, we hosted a candlelit dinner. Women from the shelter, staff, friends from town. Even Velma wore lipstick that night. We sat around the table, passing bowls of mashed potatoes and cornbread. Someone asked, "What do you really call this place? A shelter? A home?" I smiled and glanced at Emily. She answered softly, "This is..." And everyone grew quiet because it was true. Rose Harbor wasn't just a house. It was the beginning of 100 second chances. Mine, Emily's, Ruth's, Daniel's, maybe even yours. So if you're reading this or listening, sitting in your own silence and wondering if anyone will ever open the door for you again, hear me now. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to look a certain way or have it all figured out. You just have to keep going. Because somewhere, out there, a door is waiting to open. And someone is standing on the other side, whispering the words that saved my life. Welcome home. Thanks for listening.